Black woman stands up to racist cops for a Hell's Angel. The next day, 200 bikers pack her diner. The morning sun cast a pale gold light over the cracked sidewalks of Preston Hollow, a small southern town that once bustled with factory shifts and school parades. Now the buildings leaned tiredly against each other like old men sharing secrets, and Naomi Carter's diner, Carter's Table, hand-painted on a fading sign, stood like a stubborn holdout against time and silence. Inside, Naomi scrubbed the counter with the same determination she had used to keep the place afloat for 3 years since her father passed. The cloth in her hand had already lost its fight against the coffee stain near the register, but she scrubbed anyway. It wasn't about the stain, it was about holding on. She paused, rolling her sore wrist and glancing at the dusty fan blades overhead. "Place could use a miracle," she muttered. But miracles weren't common in towns like Preston Hollow. Especially not for black women with unpaid electric bills and half a freezer full of chicken-fried steak no one seemed to want anymore. The bell above the door jingled, a sound that usually brought hope, or at least a distraction. Naomi looked up. The diner had been nearly empty all morning, only 2 elderly men drinking coffee silently in the back booth. But now, standing in the doorway, was a man who immediately set the air on edge. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a beard the color of cigarette ash and clothes soaked in road dust. His boots were heavy, scuffed. The patches on his leather jacket were unmistakable. The Grim Reaper holding a scythe stitched on his back said it louder than words. Hell's Angels. Naomi's chest tightened. She glanced at the old men in the corner. One froze mid-sip, the other gripped his cane like a weapon. Even the ceiling fan seemed to hesitate. The biker nodded once and moved toward the stool farthest from the others. He lowered himself with a groan, like the weight of everything he carried was just as heavy as his body. Naomi wiped her hands on her apron and approached. "Welcome to Carter's Table," she said with a voice she hoped sounded more confident than she felt. "Coffee?" The man looked up. His eyes, pale blue and rimmed with red, met hers. Tired, grieving, human. "Black. Hot. Whatever's fastest," he rasped. "Been riding since 3 a.m., heading back to the hospital." Naomi poured the coffee without a word, sliding it across to him. She saw the tremble in his hands as he reached for the mug. A hospital bracelet peeked out from under his sleeve. She recognized that twitch, that exhaustion. She'd lived it when her father got sick. "Rough morning?" she asked. The man gave a dry laugh, more exhale than humor. "Daughter's in stage 4. They said she might not see Friday. Came here for a break. Needed to breathe." Naomi's heart sank. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "If you're hungry, breakfast's on me. Don't argue." He blinked, surprised. "Name's Hank Rourke," she nodded. "Naomi." "Sit tight, Hank. I'll bring you something." As she stepped away, the diner door opened again. This time, the air didn't shift. It clenched. Sheriff Dean Booker walked in with the kind of swagger only small-town authority can produce. His deputy, Melanie Kane, followed, younger, more unsure, her hand never far from her radio. Dean's eyes locked on Hank instantly. "Well, well," he said loudly. "Look what the wind dragged in. Didn't know we were opening the town to gang chapters again." Hank didn't look up. Naomi's pulse quickened. She could feel it coming. The storm. Dean leaned his elbows on the counter, all fake charm and squinting suspicion. "What's the occasion, big guy? Selling crank or just scaring old folks?" Naomi stepped between them. "He's having breakfast," she said evenly. "Like anyone else." Dean's eyes narrowed. "With that patch." "You serious, Naomi?" She held his stare. "You're welcome to a menu, Sheriff, but if you're here to harass a customer, I'll have to ask you to leave. Melanie's brow furrowed. Naomi, maybe we just want to check his ID. Standard. No, Naomi snapped. What you're doing is profiling. He's done nothing wrong. Dean's face flushed. He turned to Hank. You got ID? Hank reached slowly for his wallet, fingers deliberate. Naomi's voice cut in again. He's not the one who should be explaining himself right now. Dean straightened, his voice a warning growl. You siding with an outlaw now, Naomi. That who we are? Naomi didn't blink. I'm siding with someone who lost a child. You want to make a scene out of that? The diner was dead silent. Hank stared at his coffee. Melanie shifted uncomfortably. And Dean. Dean looked like a man torn between doubling down and backing off. You're making a mistake, he said finally, low. This town remembers things. Naomi's jaw tightened. So do I. Without another word, Dean slapped the counter, turned on his heel, and walked out. Melanie hesitated, eyes flicking between Naomi and Hank before following him. The bell rang behind them. Naomi exhaled for the first time in minutes. Her hands were shaking. You didn't have to do that, Hank said quietly. She looked at him. Yeah, I did. Outside, the morning was still bright, but something had shifted. Naomi knew what it meant. The looks would come. The whispers. Preston Hollow wasn't known for second chances, or for forgiving black women who raised their voices. But as Hank finished his coffee, left a 20 under the cup despite her protest, and gave her a nod that was more gratitude than words could carry, Naomi Carter knew this was far from over. And deep in her chest, under the worry and the fear, a fire began to burn. Because standing up wasn't just a choice. It was a legacy. The next morning, Naomi Carter stood behind the counter of Carter's table with a rag in hand, polishing a coffee mug that didn't need polishing. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours. Every time she closed her eyes, the confrontation from yesterday played on a loop. Dean Booker's glare, Melanie's hesitation, Hank's trembling hands, and the silence that followed when she chose to speak up. She glanced toward the front door. No customers, not even the regulars. The 2 elderly chess players hadn't shown. Mrs. Lindstrom, who usually brought her grandkids in for pancakes on Thursdays, skipped. It was past 9, and not a single order had gone out. A cardboard sign had been taped to the front door when she arrived that morning, written in red marker. No biker lovers, no cop haters. She ripped it down and stuffed it deep into the trash. Her hands had been shaking ever since. By 10, the air in the diner was still, thick with absence. Naomi poured herself a lukewarm cup of coffee and sat at the corner booth, staring at the quiet. Her mind spun with doubts. Had she done the right thing? Would people come back? Was Carter's table going to die because she chose to stand her ground? A small chime broke the silence. The door opened. Naomi stood up quickly, heart racing. 2 strangers entered. The man was lean, tall, with a weathered face and silver hair pulled into a short ponytail. He wore a leather jacket, dark denim, and a silver skull pin gleamed at his collar. The woman beside him had long gray hair in a braid, a denim vest with the same patch as Hank's, Hell's Angels, but her face was warm and open. You Naomi Carter? The man asked. Yes, she said, her voice careful. He stepped forward, offering his hand. Roy Morrison. This is my wife, Linda, Hank's brother. Naomi's shoulders eased a little. She reached out and shook his hand. Hank told us what happened yesterday, Linda said gently. He's still at the hospital with Jesse, but he wanted us to come. He said you treated him like a person when no one else would. Naomi nodded, trying to steady the emotion rising in her chest. How's Jesse? Linda's smile faltered. Fighting hard. They're trying something new, but the odds aren't great. Hank's a mess, but he couldn't stop talking about you, about how you stood up for him. Roy added, he said you didn't flinch, even when the sheriff pushed you. Said you looked at him like he was more than the patch on his back. Naomi folded her arms, trying to hide the sting in her eyes. Didn't seem like he needed another fight. Seemed like he needed a meal. Roy smiled faintly. Sometimes those are the same thing. She offered them coffee. They accepted. The diner finally felt like it had a pulse again, the air shifting slightly as the kettle hissed, and the clink of mugs brought life to the silence. When they finished their cups, Roy leaned forward slightly, voice low but firm. We didn't just come to say thanks. We came to give you a heads up. Naomi frowned. About what? Roy looked at Linda, then back to Naomi. Word got around. What word? That you stood up to a sheriff for a reaper. Naomi blinked. In our world, Roy continued, that kind of thing doesn't go unnoticed. Loyalty means everything to us. So people are coming. Not for trouble, for respect. Naomi's brow creased. What do you mean people are coming? Bikers. Chapters. Some local, some from out of state. They're rolling in tomorrow morning. Said they want to eat here. Support you. Naomi felt like the floor dropped out beneath her. Wait, how many? Roy exchanged a glance with Linda. Last I heard, a few dozen, but word travels fast. Could be more. A lot more. Naomi gripped the edge of the counter. I don't even have enough food for 10, let alone dozens of bikers. Linda smiled. That's taken care of. Hank called ahead to your supplier, told them to double your order. Said to put it on his tab. He also mentioned something about a smoked brisket recipe you used to serve on Sundays. Naomi felt her mouth open slightly in disbelief. He remembered that? He did, Linda said, her voice soft. Said it reminded him of home. Naomi pressed a hand to her chest. I don't even know what to say. Roy leaned back. Say you'll be ready. They're coming at noon, tomorrow. As they left, Naomi stood alone again in the diner. But it wasn't quiet anymore. Not in her head, not in her chest. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone, called her supplier, confirmed the order, and then started calling anyone she could think of. Her neighbor's son who worked at the church, a girl who used to waitress summers during college, the baker down the street who still owed her a favor. Most of them said yes. The day blurred. Cleaning, prepping, planning. Every minute laced with anxiety. At midnight, Naomi sat in the back booth, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion, staring out the window at the dark. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. Whether people would laugh in her face, whether the sheriff would show up again, whether the entire town would turn its back on her for good. But in that moment, a quiet pride settled in her chest. She had stood up. And now, the world was standing with her. And for the first time in months, Carter's table felt like it was about to matter again. The next morning, the air in Willow Creek buzzed with a strange anticipation. Naomi Carter stood on the steps of Carter's table, apron already tied around her waist, hair pulled into a tight bun, watching the road. The sun hadn't even cleared the treetops, but her hands were already sore from hours of prep. Eggs cracked. Biscuits baked, coffee brewed. She had barely slept. She didn't need to. The adrenaline was keeping her upright. Inside, the diner had transformed overnight. Every booth was spotless. Fresh flowers sat in glass jars at each table. Her college friend Yolanda had returned her call, showing up with her teenage son Mason and 3 kids from the youth center to help. Naomi's neighbor Mrs. Reese brought in extra coffee makers, people she hadn't seen in months. Some she thought had quietly turned on her, showed up one by one, offering flour, hands, and time. It wasn't a full staff, but it was a crew. And they were ready. By 11:30, Naomi stood behind the counter, hands gripping the edge as she glanced at the clock. Roy and Linda had promised noon. She didn't know what she expected. A couple dozen bikers, maybe. 50, tops. At 11:45, the silence outside cracked with a low rumble. Naomi stepped out just as the first bikes appeared around the corner. It started with 1, then 5, then 30. Then what felt like an army. Chrome glinted in the sun, leather jackets, denim vests, patches of different states, cities, and chapters. Engines revved and snarled. The road vibrated under their tires. By the time the last wave pulled in, the diner was surrounded. Main Street, once sleepy and still, was alive with movement, color, and noise. Naomi didn't breathe. At least 200 bikers stood in front of her diner. 200. Some dismounted. Some stood beside their bikes. Some held flags. Others carried nothing but the look of quiet resolve. No shouting. No intimidation. Just presence. Roy Morrison walked up the steps with Hank at his side. Naomi blinked. Hank looked tired, his beard longer, his eyes shadowed, but there was a light in them now, a fire that hadn't been there before. "You weren't kidding," Naomi said, voice low. Hank gave a short laugh. "You didn't think we'd let this go, did you?" Before she could answer, the diner door opened behind her. Yolanda poked her head out. "Naomi, we're full, every booth." "Standing room only." Naomi turned. Sure enough, the inside of the diner was a sea of leather and chatter. Plates were moving. Coffee was pouring. People were laughing. And it wasn't just bikers anymore. She spotted Mrs. Lindstrom at a booth with 2 tattooed women who looked like they could bench press tractors. At the counter, Melanie Hart, the deputy from yesterday, sat sipping coffee, her badge nowhere in sight, face unreadable. "Looks like word got out," Hank said. Naomi nodded slowly, trying to keep the tears from welling. "Yeah." It did. He held out something wrapped in brown paper. "From Jesse." Naomi took it, unwrapping it carefully. Inside was a small leather keychain with the words, "Grace is loud," etched into it. Below it, a tiny stitched image of a coffee mug. "She's still in treatment," Hank said, his voice catching. "But she smiled yesterday." "First time in weeks, when I told her what you did." Naomi held the keychain to her chest. "Tell her I'll save her a seat." A commotion near the corner of the street broke their moment. Naomi turned just in time to see Sheriff Dean Booker pulling up in his squad car, lights off, face already sour. He parked directly across the street and stepped out, arms stiff at his sides. Behind him, 2 town council members emerged from a sedan. The street hushed again. Dean walked across, eyes sweeping the crowd, face hard. "Miss Carter," he said when he reached her, voice cold and practiced. "We've received reports." Naomi didn't flinch. "You're not here to eat, are you?" Dean ignored the question. "You're harboring a known associate of the Grim Reaper's Motorcycle Club. That symbol is associated with criminal activity in several states." "Is that so?" Naomi said evenly. "Yes, it is. And if you want this place to stay open, you should consider who you align yourself with." Before she could speak, another voice cut in. "That's funny," said a man from the edge of the crowd, "because I remember hearing you ask for campaign donations at one of our barbecues last year." Naomi turned to me. A tall, burly man with a deep Southern accent stepped forward. His vest read, "President, Huntsville Chapter." Dean stiffened. The town council members whispered to each other. The man stepped closer. "You ever threaten a woman for giving a man breakfast again, you'll be dealing with more than just one chapter, Sheriff." Naomi felt the crowd shift. Not aggressive, but united. Dean looked around, saw no backing, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked small. "You're making a mistake," he muttered to her, low. "No," Naomi said, voice stronger now. "You did, yesterday." He didn't reply. He turned and walked away, the councilman trailing him. Inside, the chatter picked up again. Naomi felt the tension bleed out of the air like steam from a kettle. She looked back at Hank. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You already did," he replied. "You just kept the door open." The rest of the day was a blur. Naomi cooked until her arms ached. Mason bussed tables like a pro. Roy and Linda helped wash dishes. Strangers left $100 tips. The register was so full she had to empty it 3 times. But more than the money, it was the looks, the conversations, the people who stayed. And when the sun began to set and the street slowly emptied, Naomi stood on her front step again, watching the last bike disappear into the horizon. Behind her, the diner smelled of syrup, sweat, and something new. Pride. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. A message from Jesse. It read simply, "Still here." "Thank you." Naomi closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, maybe more signs. Maybe more silence from the town. But tonight, she had proof that doing right didn't always mean standing alone. And that was enough. The quiet of the next morning wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. Naomi stood behind the counter of Carter's table, watching the street through the front window. The crowd from the day before had vanished, like a dream fading at sunrise. The roar of engines had been replaced with silence, thick, judgmental, and slow. The parking lot was empty. No regulars, no trucks. No bikers, only Naomi, Yolanda, and the ticking of the wall clock. She poured herself a cup of coffee, more out of habit than thirst. Her body ached in every joint, but her mind wouldn't rest. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by an unsettling stillness. Yolanda leaned against the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, brow furrowed. "Where is everybody?" she asked, voice low. Naomi didn't answer right away. She just sipped her coffee, staring out at the empty town like it might offer answers. "They're scared," she finally said, "or angry, or both." Yolanda nodded. "They saw you stand up to the sheriff. You made them choose sides, and most folks around here, they'd rather stay in the middle." Naomi's stomach twisted. She had known there'd be backlash, but the speed of it, the coldness, it rattled her. It wasn't just the silence. It was the looks, the way neighbors averted their eyes when she walked past, how the bakery across the street, owned by a woman she'd once prayed beside, suddenly had a closed sign hanging during breakfast hours. At 10 a.m., the bell above the door finally jingled. Naomi looked up, expecting a customer. Instead, Deputy Laura Miles walked in, not in uniform this time, but in jeans and a plain gray t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back, and she looked tired, older than Naomi remembered. Naomi stiffened. Laura raised both hands, palms out. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Then you might be the only one," Naomi replied. Laura took a slow breath. "Can I sit?" Naomi motioned to a stool. She sat carefully, like someone crossing into enemy territory. "I saw the council meeting minutes," Laura said, voice low. "There was a closed-door discussion last night. They're calling for a vote to suspend your business license." Naomi blinked. "What?" Laura nodded. "They're saying you allowed a known criminal organization to stage a gathering on public property. They're citing public nuisance ordinances, health code violations, anything they can dig up." Naomi's mouth went dry. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. That's insane. They ate food. Paid for it. No one even parked illegally. Laura looked down at her hands. You embarrassed them. Dean especially. You made him look weak in front of a crowd. He's been on a warpath ever since. Naomi's voice sharpened. So instead of admitting they were wrong, they're going to shut down a woman's business, a black woman's diner, for feeding a sick man and not letting him get harassed? Laura didn't look up. Naomi exhaled through her nose, slow and controlled. What are you doing here, Laura? Why tell me? Laura finally met her eyes. Because I was wrong too. I stood there and let it happen, and I hated myself for it. Naomi folded her arms. Guilt won't pay the bills. I know, Laura said, but maybe this will help. She slid a manila envelope across the counter. Naomi hesitated, then opened it. Inside were photocopies, emails, internal memos, scanned counsel notes, all showing deliberate efforts to target Naomi's business. Some even included comments about reining her in and setting an example. Where did you get this? Laura straightened. Dean's office. He doesn't exactly lock his files. He thinks no one would ever dare challenge him. Naomi stared at the papers, brain spinning. You can use that, Laura added. Take it to the press, social media. File a grievance, whatever you need. Won't that come back on you? It already is, Laura said quietly. But maybe it should. They sat in silence for a beat. Then Naomi closed the envelope and set it aside. I don't know if I want to go nuclear, she admitted. I just want to keep my doors open. Then you'd better be ready. The vote's in 2 days. When Laura left, Naomi stood in the middle of the diner for a long time, the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. She had never been a fighter. Not like this. She could hustle, sure, grind, stretch a dollar, make magic out of leftovers. But this was different. This was war. She turned to Yolanda, who had been watching quietly from the kitchen. Would you still help me? Naomi asked, her voice unsteady. If things get ugly? Yolanda didn't even blink. I've been waiting for a good reason to slap somebody in a council seat for years. Naomi cracked a smile. It didn't last long, but it was enough. That night, Naomi didn't sleep again. Instead, she sat at the table in her father's hospital room, papers spread in front of her, pen in hand. She was drafting statements, checking bylaws, planning next steps. Her father stirred once, eyes fluttering open just enough to meet hers. You're still fighting, he rasped. Naomi squeezed his hand. Yeah, I think I've picked another one. He gave the faintest smile. Good. By sunrise, she had a plan. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even pretty. But it was hers. She wasn't going to beg. She was going to fight. And this time, she wasn't fighting alone. Naomi Carter hadn't felt this kind of tension since the day she stood up to Officer Dean Harper. But now, it wasn't just a confrontation. It was a countdown. 48 hours until the town council vote. 48 hours until they could strip her of everything her father had built with 2 hands and a cast-iron skillet. The folder Deputy Laura Miles gave her sat like a loaded weapon in the back office. Documents that could blow this town's good old boy system wide open. Naomi had copied everything. Twice. One set at home, one in a safe deposit box, but going public. That was a whole other storm. She knew exactly how it would be spun. An ungrateful troublemaker, outsider, agitator. Small towns had a way of twisting truth until the one who spoke it looked like the enemy. Still, as Naomi stood in the back pantry organizing delivery receipts, she knew one thing clearly. She was done backing down. The doorbell rang. She wiped her hands on a towel and came around to the counter. It wasn't a customer. It was someone far more dangerous, Mayor Calvin Brooks. He was a heavy-set man in his 60s, always in a crisp tan suit, shiny shoes, and a polite smile that felt like velvet hiding a dagger. Naomi had seen that smile plenty over church potlucks and town hall barbecues. It never reached his eyes. "Miss Carter," he said smoothly. "Do you have a minute?" She didn't offer him coffee, didn't invite him to sit, just nodded once and folded her arms. Calvin glanced around the empty diner. "Quiet this morning," he remarked. "Folks must have lost their appetite for justice," Naomi replied evenly. He chuckled like they were sharing a joke. "I wanted to come down personally," he began, "because I believe in community, in second chances. You've made some bold choices lately, and I think maybe you've underestimated the impact they have on Willow Creek." Naomi tilted her head. "You mean the impact of not letting a man get harassed in my diner?" "That impact?" Calvin held up a hand. "Let's not be dramatic. You made a scene, Naomi. You put this town on edge." "No," she said, voice firm. "This town was already on edge. I just lit the match that showed how flammable it really is." He sighed, the smile faltering. "There's a way out of this. Quiet things down. Reaffirm your loyalty to this community. Issue a small statement to the Gazette. Say you acted in the heat of the moment, that you don't condone criminal affiliations." "No," Naomi said sharply. Calvin blinked. "I'm offering you a solution." "No," she repeated. "You're offering me a leash." "And I'm not wearing one." He stepped closer, voice dropping. "If that vote goes through and you lose your license, this place will die. You know that, right? And those bikers? They'll ride on. You'll be left with nothing but empty booths and pity." Naomi leaned forward. "I'd rather go down standing than live on my knees." He studied her, face unreadable. Then he reached into his jacket and laid a folded paper on the counter. "You've been served?" "Council hearing is now formal. Public. Thursday at 6. He turned and left without another word. Naomi stared at the notice, hands trembling, not with fear but with fury. By noon, word had spread. Laura showed up again, this time in uniform, despite the chill between her and her department. She helped Naomi tape the notice to the inside of the diner's front window, right where every passerby could see it. "This your idea of rallying the troops?" Laura asked. Naomi smiled grimly. "Exactly." And like clockwork, the door opened. In walked Roy Morrison and Linda, Hank's brother and sister-in-law. Roy's face was tight. Linda looked like she hadn't slept. "Jesse's taken a bad turn," Roy said. "They're saying hours, not days." Naomi's heart sank. "Hank." "He's holding up," Linda said softly. "But he wanted us to come tell you something." Roy reached into his jacket and pulled out a patch. Not a big one, just a small black embroidered square with red lettering. "Reaper Sister." "Hank said he saw you that day. Said you didn't blink, even when the whole town froze. He said his daughter would have liked you." Naomi took the patch in both hands, throat thick. "He asked if we'd ride down to some of our friends," Roy continued. "Word's going out today." Naomi blinked. "Word?" Linda nodded. "That they're trying to shut you down, that they're trying to bury you." Naomi swallowed hard. "I didn't ask for that." "You didn't have to," Roy said. "Some debts pay themselves." They left her with the patch and a promise. If the town wanted a fight, the Reapers would show up wearing boots and leather. That night, Naomi sat by her father's bedside again, the town council letter clutched in one hand and the reaper patch in the other. Evelyn Carter hadn't stirred in days, but she spoke anyway. "Dad, they're going to shut me down, because I wouldn't let hate win, because I wouldn't play quiet. But I think something's coming. Something loud." She smiled faintly. "You always said storms clean the air." "Well, this one's almost here." Outside, thunder rolled low in the distance, and Naomi Carter didn't flinch. Naomi Carter stood at the sink of Carter's diner, sleeves rolled to her elbows, scrubbing the same plate she'd washed 3 times already. Her eyes kept drifting to the taped-up notice on the window, its bold letters now curled at the edges, but still unmistakable. Public hearing, Thursday, 6 p.m. License review. The whole town had seen it by now. Some looked away. Some looked twice. Some didn't even hide their smirks. Outside, Willow Creek moved like a town pretending not to be holding its breath. But inside Naomi, a storm was tightening. By late afternoon, the diner was quiet. A few loyal customers came by. Molly, the nurse from the clinic, left a 20 under her coffee mug and offered a silent thumbs up before heading out. A young mechanic named Darnell, who used to sit at the counter with Naomi's dad as a teen, stopped by just to say, "Whatever happens Thursday, you already won in my book." But the crowd wasn't what it had been before the confrontation. Business was down, the tip jar light. At 5, the door opened, and Naomi looked up, expecting another pity visit. Instead, she froze. 3 officers stepped inside. Dean Harper wasn't among them, but one of the men wore sergeant stripes. And they weren't smiling. "Miss Carter," the sergeant began, pulling something from his breast pocket, "we received an anonymous complaint this morning. Claims your business has been serving without proper inspection clearance, health and fire code." Naomi blinked. "I had my last inspection 2 months ago." "Passed. Clean sheet." "Mind if we verify?" he asked, holding up a clipboard. Naomi swallowed hard, then nodded. "Go ahead." They walked through like they owned the place, opening cupboards, checking under the sink, testing smoke detectors. Naomi stood still, eyes following every move. She'd grown up in this diner. She knew every inch of it better than the back of her hand. When they were done, the sergeant stepped back to the counter. "Well," he said, looking down at his clipboard. "Several minor infractions. Could be grounds for temporary suspension." Naomi's lips parted. "Minor? Like what?" "Grease trap overdue for cleaning. 1 exit sign with a flickering bulb. Expired fire extinguisher." Naomi nearly laughed. "That's routine maintenance." "Not suspension worthy." He didn't argue, just set the clipboard down, leaving behind a yellow citation notice. "Follow up within 72 hours, he said, then added, "And you might want to rethink Thursday's meeting. These things tend to go easier when there's cooperation." As they left, one of the younger officers glanced back at her. He didn't look proud, he looked ashamed. Naomi ripped the citation from the clipboard and stared at it, heart thudding. It was a message, clear as day. "Sit down, stay quiet, or we'll bury you in paper cuts." She walked to the back, into the pantry, and pulled the fire extinguisher off the wall. She checked the tag. 2 weeks expired. Damn it. She hadn't even noticed. Her phone buzzed. "Roy," she answered with a tired, "Hey." "We just heard," he said, voice tight. "They're playing hardball." "I don't have the money to fix all this in 72 hours, Naomi said flatly. "I've got enough to restock, maybe patch the sign. But replacing the whole extinguisher system? Cleaning crews? It's more than I can swing." There was silence on the line. Then Roy said, "Give me 10 minutes." Naomi didn't get a chance to ask what he meant, because 10 minutes later, the rumble came. This time, she didn't have to look out the window to know what it was. Engines. Dozens of them. She stepped onto the front stoop just as a sea of leather and chrome flowed into the street. Not 24, not 50. More than 100. Every bike parked with precision in front of the diner, and in the center, a massive RV rumbled to a stop. The side door opened, and out stepped a woman in her 70s, with snow-white braids, black overalls, and a cigarette dangling from her lips. "Name's Mama Lou," she called as she walked up. "Roy said you needed code compliance." Behind her, 3 bikers in matching vests rolled out toolkits, fire extinguishers, and even a ladder. Naomi stared. "What is this?" "Call it community service," Mama Lou said, grinning wide. "I've got a welding license and a fire code cert in 3 states. You give me a sandwich and access to your breaker panel, and this place will be cleaner than a church pew on Easter." Naomi blinked fast. "I can't pay you." Mama Lou waved her off. "We ain't here for cash, sugar. We're here for what's right." By nightfall, the diner sparkled, exit sign fixed, extinguisher replaced. Grease trap flushed, the clipboard infractions erased. Naomi watched as the makeshift crew worked, hands steady, laughter loud. It didn't feel like a charity job. It felt like family showing up for one of their own. She walked over to Roy as he lit a cigarette beside his bike. "I didn't ask for this," she said quietly. "Nope," he said. "But you earned it." She looked down the street at the line of bikes stretching beyond her view. "It's too much." "No," Roy replied, voice firm. "What's too much is what they're trying to do to you. What's too much is how long they've gotten away with it." Naomi was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "Are they all coming Thursday?" Roy glanced up at the sky, smirking. "You'll see." Naomi didn't sleep much that night. Not from fear, but from fire. Tomorrow the storm would break wide open, and this time she wouldn't be standing alone. The town hall had never been this full. The usually quiet meeting room now buzzed with low murmurs and wary glances. Wooden chairs lined in rows, everyone occupied, with a handful of locals standing along the back wall. Naomi Carter stood near the front, shoulders square, her apron traded for a clean blue blouse and black slacks. Her hands were clasped tight in front of her, knuckles white. Outside, engines still rumbled low. She hadn't dared look yet. A week ago, she'd been begging for customers. Now half the town was here, and the other half might be waiting in the parking lot. Mayor Colleen Briggs adjusted the microphone at the podium, her perfectly coiffed hair catching the warm yellow light. The plaque in front of her read, "Town Council President," and she wore the expression of someone who had planned for everything. Naomi could tell immediately. This wasn't a meeting. It was a trial. "Thank you all for attending," Mayor Briggs began. "We are here to discuss the matter of Carter's Diner and its recent code violations, as well as the unrest and disruption that has followed recent incidents involving law enforcement and—" She hesitated, then cleared her throat. "And outside groups with known affiliations to motorcycle clubs." The word motorcycle rippled through the room like a sneeze in a funeral. Naomi's pulse quickened. She kept her eyes forward. Dean Harper sat 2 rows behind her, arms folded, face tight with smug satisfaction. Laura Miles, however, was not seated beside him. Naomi had noticed. The mayor continued. "Before we open the floor, we've received several community complaints expressing concern about safety, noise, and the changing clientele surrounding Carter's Diner. These are valid concerns." That did it. Naomi stood. Her voice was calm but loud enough to be heard. Are these concerns about safety, or just about who's walking through the door? Gasps rose. Murmurs. Someone coughed awkwardly. Mayor Briggs held up her hand. Miss Carter, you'll have a chance to speak. No, Naomi said, her voice still even. I think I better speak now. Because what's happening here isn't about fire codes or noise complaints, it's about fear. Fear of people who look different. Fear of people you've already decided don't belong. She turned slowly, her gaze sweeping the room. Last week, a man came into my diner. Tired. Hungry. Scared for his daughter. He wore a jacket with a patch that made people uncomfortable. But you know what I saw? A father. A man with shaking hands and hospital bands on his wrist. A beat of silence. Dean scoffed. He's part of a known gang. Naomi turned to him, calm stillness in her face. And you're part of a known sheriff's department. That didn't stop you from harassing a sick man over coffee. The room shifted. Someone coughed. Another mumbled agreement. Naomi pressed on. I didn't choose to make a scene, but I won't apologize for not staying quiet either. Because silence is how injustice survives. And if that means this town doesn't want my diner anymore, fine, but at least say it plain. Don't hide behind broken light bulbs. From the back of the room, the door opened with a creak. Heads turned. In walked Roy Morrison. He didn't speak. Behind him, Linda. Then Mama Lou. And then, one by one, leather jackets began filling the back rows. Quiet. Respectful. Standing. Every patch bore the Grim Reaper's insignia, but none of them made a sound. Mayor Briggs's voice trembled slightly as she said, This meeting is for town residents only. Mama Lou stepped forward. We're not here to speak. We're here to listen. And stand. A hush fell. Then came the sound that changed everything. Outside. Engines. Roaring in unison. Every window in the meeting hall rattled as a synchronized growl filled the air like thunder rolling through the valley. It wasn't just background noise, it was a message. We are here. We are watching. Mayor Briggs swallowed hard. She glanced sideways at the council members, visibly rattled. I believe we should take a brief recess to deliberate. She stood. Before she could step away from the podium, the back doors swung open again. And this time, it wasn't another biker. It was Deputy Laura Miles. She walked straight to the front, stopped next to Naomi, and faced the council. My name is Deputy Laura Miles, she said clearly. And I was present during the incident in question. Dean's head snapped toward her, his jaw clenched. Laura continued, I didn't speak then, and I regret that. But I will now. Officer Harper's actions were inappropriate, unprofessional, and targeted. Miss Carter did nothing wrong. She acted with more dignity than most people would have. Including me. Dean leapt to his feet. Laura, what the hell are you doing? Laura looked at him, then turned away. Mayor Briggs was pale. Councilman Hughes spoke up, voice cracking. So, what are we saying here? That we drop the review? There was a pause. Then another council member nodded. I think we've heard enough. And just like that, it shifted. The motion to suspend Carter's Diner failed. The citation was dismissed, the review dissolved. Naomi stood still, stunned. Roy leaned forward and whispered, You won. But she didn't feel victorious. Not yet. Not until she turned and saw Dean Harper storming out, his face red with fury, shoving past bikers and townsfolk alike. And then, out of nowhere, a voice called out, Dean Harper, you are hereby placed under investigation pending further review of your conduct. It came from a stern-looking woman near the council exit. Naomi blinked. She hadn't seen her before. "I'm internal affairs," the woman said simply. "He should have been pulled weeks ago." "We've been waiting for someone to say something." Naomi's breath caught. The ripple of shock turned to murmurs of vindication. As the meeting adjourned and people spilled out into the hallway, Naomi felt hands clap her shoulders. Hugs, nods. A slow crumbling of something she hadn't realized was still holding her back. Outside, the bikes still rumbled, but now they were joined by something else, the sound of a town starting to wake up. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the ridge when Naomi Carter walked back into her diner, the key turning in the lock with a quiet finality. For the first time in weeks, the silence inside Carter's diner felt warm, not hollow. Tables were freshly wiped, coffee pots cleaned, chairs lined up neatly like soldiers waiting for morning roll call. She paused at the door, letting the moment settle into her chest. Behind her, the distant rumble of engines slowly faded down Main Street as the last of the bikers peeled off in groups. Some waved as they passed. Others just nodded with silent respect. They didn't need to say anything. Their presence had spoken louder than any words could. Naomi exhaled. She crossed to the counter, untied her apron, and reached for the framed photo of her father next to the old cash register. His smile, frozen in time, stared back at her like a promise she had finally kept. She smiled softly and whispered, "We made it, Daddy." A knock on the door made her turn. She expected Roy or Linda, maybe Laura. But instead, it was a man she hadn't seen before, mid-40s, tall, clean-cut in a tailored charcoal suit that didn't quite match the dust on his boots. He held up a small leather folder, flashed a badge. "Name's Aaron Knox, Department of Justice," he said, his voice calm and clipped. "Mind if I come in for a minute?" Naomi blinked. Sure," she said, stepping aside. "What's this about?" He stepped inside, giving the room a slow once-over before settling at the counter. "We've been following the situation in Willow Creek. A number of complaints, pattern of behavior involving local law enforcement." He met her eyes. "What you did, standing up to it, it mattered." Naomi crossed her arms, cautious. "Are you here to tell me I'm in trouble?" Aaron chuckled. "No, ma'am. I'm here to tell you you're part of something bigger now." He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a folder, and slid it toward her. "There's a community task force being launched, real oversight, not just in Willow Creek but in towns like it across the state. We need voices like yours, people rooted in the community, people who don't flinch." Naomi looked down at the folder. Her name was typed neatly on the front. She opened it slowly. Inside was a formal offer. Consultation role, advisory board, travel stipend, everything official. "You want me?" she asked, still unsure. "We need you," Aaron said simply. "Not because of a patch or a title. Because when it counted, you chose decency. That's rare." She swallowed, heart pounding. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. But don't think too long. People are watching, and they're listening." He stood, offered his hand. Naomi took it. "Thanks for the coffee," he said, and walked out. She stood there a long time before reaching beneath the counter for the clean black Sharpie she kept for writing daily specials on the board. Today, she used it for something else. Above the counter, just beneath her father's picture, she scribbled on the wall, "Justice starts with kindness." Then she grabbed a step stool and carefully hung the leather vest, the one gifted to her by the Grim Reapers, on a small hook beside it. The back patch read, "Carter's Diner." Beneath it, a smaller one, "Protected." The bell above the door jingled again. Naomi turned. This time it was Jessie. She looked pale, thinner than in Hank's pictures, But her eyes were alive. And her smile broke open across the room like morning light. "Hi," Jessie said, voice raspy but warm. "I had to meet the woman who made my dad believe in people again." Naomi wiped her hands on her jeans and walked forward. "And I had to meet the girl who gave him the strength to keep fighting." They hugged. No words needed. In the booths, the regulars were starting to trickle back in. Mrs. Worthington with her crossword, Malik with a worn deck of cards. Even Officer Miles, plainclothes now, sat near the window, quietly sipping coffee and scanning the paper. Outside, a few bikes still lined the curb, engines ticking quietly as they cooled in the golden light. Naomi tied her apron back on. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She took her place behind the counter and tapped the bell by the register. "All right, folks," she called. "The pie's fresh, the coffee's hot, and tonight's special is no judgment, served with a side of hope." Laughter filled the room. She smiled. Because in a world too often tilted toward the loudest, the cruelest, and the most afraid, today had proven something different. Courage is contagious. Kindness is louder than fear. And when one person stands up, not for a title, or a uniform, or a patch, but for what's right, it doesn't just change one diner, one town, or even one man. It can ripple outward, shaking the silence until the whole world listens. So to everyone out there, wherever you're watching from, if you ever wonder whether standing up matters, whether speaking out makes a difference, whether a small act of bravery is worth the risk, let this be your answer. Yes. It always is. If you felt something in this story, if it moved you, inspired you, made you think, please like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to believe in goodness again. Because stories like Naomi's remind us all, we're never too small to make a difference. One plate of pie at a time, one choice at a time. One voice at a time. Your voice might just be next.